The night my birthday disappeared from my own life began with one sentence that felt like someone had reached into my chest and turned something off. I was standing at the end of the dining table, trying to decide whether the place cards looked too formal for an 18th, when my sister burst into tears for the third evening in a row and screamed that if she could not be happy, then I should not be either. She said it with the certainty of someone who had always gotten her way simply by falling apart in front of an audience. Dad put his fork down, slow and heavy, like the weight of her sadness had more gravity than anything I could possibly hope for. That was the moment I knew something in the night had already shifted, even before he spoke the words that would erase the celebration I had spent weeks planning. A few hours earlier, I had still believed the day would belong to me. I had booked a small event room near the river, sent printed invitations 2 weeks ahead, and even ordered one of those tiered white cakes with soft pink flowers and vanilla bean icing. It felt like such a grown-up moment. 18 had always been the line in the sand, where childhood ended and a person was finally allowed to want something that was theirs alone. I had taken extra shifts at the coffee shop so I could pay half of the cost myself. I told Dad he did not need to help, but he insisted, saying it was tradition for a dad to be generous on an 18th birthday. I had believed him. That belief made what came later hit harder. My sister, Leanne, had been locked in her room for days after her boyfriend broke up with her. She was 23, old enough to know that heartbreak did not give someone a free pass to take the world hostage. Still, the house responded to her sadness the way a hospital responds to alarms. Mom tiptoed. David kept checking the temperature of the house, as if a quiet thermostat might soothe her. Doors closed softly, voices lowered. Every movement had to be careful. They kept telling me to understand, to give her space, to be supportive during her storm. I did. I always did. She was the sensitive one. I was the understanding one. It had been that dynamic all my life. Dinner that night was supposed to be simple spaghetti and a quick review of the dog party schedule. I had the contract from the event space inside a neat folder in my bag. I was ready to show them the setup, the lighting plan, the list of songs I wanted my friend to play. Instead, Leanne walked into the room with mascara streaks on her cheeks, took one look at the faint smile on my face, and exploded. She cried louder than she had the past 2 days combined. She said everything in the house felt unfair, that the universe was mocking her, that my happy birthday plans were rubbing salt in her heartbreak. She crumpled into Dad's arms, sobbing that she could not bear the thought of everyone celebrating while she was drowning in misery. David tightened his grip around her and looked at me with an expression that I had seen too many times. It was not anger. It was not disappointing. It was something colder. It was the decision already forming behind his eyes. The decision that my happiness was negotiable, while hers was not. I stood there frozen, holding a bowl of garlic bread, while he told her that he understood that no one in this family should be partying while she was suffering. The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that drops right before a verdict. David said that the party could not happen. He did not say, maybe. He did not say, let's talk. He said it like the matter was settled. Mom nodded right away, like she had been waiting for permission. She told me that I had to be mature, that family comes first, that celebrations could be rescheduled, but emotional wounds could not. She said they expected me to be the bigger person because I always had been. I felt something inside me tilt. Not break yet, just tilt. The silence stretched across the table in a way I could feel on my skin. Leanne buried her face in Dad's chest, but her shoulders eased, the way they always did once she got what she wanted. Mom reached for her phone. David pulled him out as well. I stood there, watching both of them work quickly, efficiently, like they were canceling a dental appointment instead of their daughter's 18th birthday. Mom typed messages to my guests, telling them the celebration was canceled due to personal reasons. David sent an email to the event space telling them we would not be coming after all. I watched my plans disappear from their screens before I had even opened my mouth. Between one breath and the next, the night I had spent so long building simply stopped existing. It was strange how calm I felt. Maybe shock does that. Or maybe it was the understanding settling into my bones that if happiness was a resource in our family, I was expected to use the least of it. That was when I caught myself thinking about something small and practical, something so ordinary, it almost made me laugh. I wondered how many people listening to this story right now have sat at a table where the conversation felt like a verdict instead of a discussion. What were you doing when you found out something you cared about did not matter as much as someone else's feelings? Did it happen in a kitchen like mine? Or in a car? Or over a quiet lunch? For me, I remember that I was standing beside that table, still holding garlic bread, when my whole night unraveled. Dad finally looked at me. He said the family was hurting, that the priority was keeping peace in the house. I wanted to ask if I was part of the family he was referring to, or just a supporting character in their emotional economy. My voice came out small when I asked why no one had even checked with me before, deciding. Mom said I knew how sensitive Leanne was. She said a real family protected the one who was struggling. She said pain spreads and joy should be paused out of respect until everyone is aligned again. Respect. That word tasted strange. I glanced at my phone. The screen lit up with one message after another. Friends responding with confusion, sympathy, some asking if I was okay, some saying they had already bought gifts. I could see the event cancellation email pop up. I stared at it for a long moment, as if I could undo it by refusing to blink. It was such a small moment, the kind of moment someone else might shrug off. But in that second, watching the confirmation message flash on the screen, I felt the final click of a lock inside me. Everything that had been wobbling quietly in my chest found its place. I was not surprised that Dad had chosen the path that protected my sister's feelings. I was not surprised that Mom stood behind it. I was not even surprised that Leanne's tears dictated the outcome. What surprised me was the clarity with which I suddenly understood my place in the work, family. I was the one expected to absorb disappointment, so others would not have to. No one asked me what I wanted. No one tried to negotiate. They simply moved me out of the way like a chair that did not fit the new arrangement. Dinner ended without another word from me. I excused myself quietly, walked up the stairs, and closed my bedroom door. I sat on the edge of my bed, looking at the soft blue dress I had planned to wear, the shoes still in their box, the pearl earrings my grandmother had given me for this exact birthday. Everything was laid out like a celebration, waiting for its moment. My phone buzzed with apologies from friends, apologies for something none of them had caused. I typed back short responses because I did not know how to explain what had just happened. How do you tell someone that your father and mother erased your birthday because your sister was sad? How do you tell anyone that the people who raised you taught you the math of family differently than other households? In our house, one person's storm always outranked another person's sunshine. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the words I had heard at dinner. If she cannot be happy, then you will not be either. A decision made without hesitation. A verdict delivered without appeal. What I did not know then was that the night held more change than just the loss of a party. I did not know that in a few hours I would stop being the daughter who bent to keep the peace. I did not know that it would be my final evening in that house as the child who always cooperated. At that moment, all I could feel was the heaviness of something shifting deep under my feet, like the floorboards of my life were about to give way. That night would be the last time I stayed in that home as the daughter who always understood. And the realization settled over me like the slow dimming of a light. I sat there for a long moment, letting the weight of it move through me, before my mind drifted back to everything I had done in the days leading up to this disaster. 2 days before my 18th birthday, I had still believed the celebration would happen without a hitch. It almost felt cruel now to remember how hopeful I had been, how certain I was that this year would be different. 2 days, the one with the vintage brick walls and strings of soft white lights that made everything look warm, even in the middle of winter. The manager had walked me through the setup, and I had given him the deposit I had, saved from selling handmade bracelets at school and taking extra shifts at the coffee shop. It felt good handing over that envelope. It felt like I had earned the right to celebrate myself. I took pictures of the room to show my friends, imagining where the cake would sit and where the tiny flower arrangements would go. I sent out reminders to everyone who had already marked yes on their invitations. The message thread filled with excitement and little heart emojis. People asked what they should wear. They asked whether there would be music. I answered everything with a smile on my face. I remember stepping out of that building and feeling the wind from the river hit my face. I felt grown in a way that was difficult to describe. Not an adult exactly, but ready. Ready for a night that belonged to me. 2 days ago, it haunted me because that was too close to turn anything around when things fell apart. You cannot send new invitations or beg for a new venue when the clock only has 48 hours left on it. Most people had already wrapped gifts or picked out outfits. Some had taken time off work. One friend had even booked a hotel room because she lived an hour away and did not want to drive late at night. 2 days might not sound like much, but when you are planning a milestone birthday, 2 days is everything. The day before the dinner that ended everything, I had shown the new shoes I bought with tips from the shop. She said they were pretty and then reminded me that Leanne was still hurting and I should try to keep the house calm. I nodded because that was my default reaction. I kept thinking I could keep the peace and keep my birthday at the same time. Looking back, that was naive. The house could only hold one emotional spotlight at a time, and that spotlight had never landed on me. The morning before dinner, I'd been writing a list of final tasks in my notebook. Pick up cake, confirm decorations, check the playlist. I never crossed any of those lines off. Instead, I watched everything slide out of my hands faster than I could process. The morning after everything collapsed, Mom followed me into the kitchen while I was pouring a glass of water. She spoke softly, like she expected me to cry or lash out. She told me that once things settled, we would make it up to you. She said the words with such confidence, as if birthdays grew on trees and families could just pluck a replacement whenever they felt like it. She said I would have many more in my life, and I should focus on what mattered most. I wanted to ask her what mattered most to her, because it clearly was not me that night. I did not say anything. I just nodded again. Dad was no better. Later that afternoon, he came into my room holding an empty laundry basket. He leaned against the doorframe like someone easing into a difficult topic. He told me that this was just one day. He said it was a weather report, like storms pass and sunshine returns without any effort. He did not look troubled. He did not look guilty. He looked determined to move on. He said I was strong, and strong people do not get hung up on small things. Small things. That phrase scraped something inside me. It was a small thing to him because he had never built something for himself only. To watch it be dismantled to soothe someone else's sadness. Leanne never apologized. She did not even pretend to. She walked around the house with puffy eyes and the air of someone who had suffered a deep tragedy, all while avoiding my gaze. When she finally spoke to me that morning, her tone was flat and unapologetic. She said she could not help how she felt, and she would not be able to handle watching me celebrate while she was falling apart. To her, my birthday was an inconvenience that needed to be removed. She expected me to understand because that was what I always did. She believed pain entitled her to priority. It always had. I saw it for what it was then, a pattern that had repeated itself so many times that I no longer recognized it as abnormal. Every argument, every fight, every decision. Leanne's discomfort always carried more weight than anything happening in my life. If she was upset, everything stopped. If she was happy, the whole house would relax. Growing up in that system meant I learned early how to quiet my needs, dim my excitement, and smooth the sharp edges of my dreams. I thought that was how families worked. I thought that was normal. The day after the canceled dinner, my phone buzzed constantly. Messages from people who had driven by the event space, confused when they found it empty. Messages from friends who were checking in. Some wrote long paragraphs, asking if everything was okay, asking if something terrible had happened. Others were shorter, just a quick note saying they were sorry or disappointed. A few sounded annoyed. One friend pointed out that she had paid for her dress cleaning and wished I had told her sooner. Another joked lightly that maybe I had changed my mind about wanting to be celebrated. They meant well, but each message hit me differently. Each one reminded me that this was not just a family decision. This was a public humiliation. A stain on a moment that was supposed to be mine. The one that hurt most was from a girl who had been my friend since middle school. She asked why I had canceled so suddenly, and if she had done something wrong. I stared at that message for a long time before typing back something vague. I told her I was not feeling well. It was easier to lie than to explain the truth. How do you tell someone that your father and mother canceled your birthday to? Protect your sister's feelings? How do you explain that you did not have a say in your own celebration because you had never really been allowed to need something loudly enough for anyone to hear you? As more messages poured in, I felt smaller with each one. It was not just that people were confused. It was that they thought I had done this to them, that I had wasted their time or misled them. I felt responsible for their disappointment, even though none of it was my fault. That is the tricky part about growing up in a family where one person's emotions rule the rest of you. You get trained into believing every ripple of unhappiness is yours to fix. By the end of the day, I stopped answering. The phone screen kept lighting up on the bed beside me, but I could not bring myself to pick it up anymore. I felt heavy and tired and strangely hollow. Not angry, not yet. Just empty. At dinner that night, no one mentioned the birthday. Mom talked about groceries. Dad talked about a shipment delay at the shop. Leanne sat quietly stirring her pasta like she was still the wounded heart of them, family. I ate in silence. It was easier that way. Arguing had never changed anything. Speaking up had never shifted the hierarchy. My silence has always been useful to them. It kept the peace. It kept the house from boiling over. That night, I realized something important. Silence was the one tool they depended on me to provide. Silence kept everything running. Silence kept me in my place. So when Mom asked if I was disappointed, I simply said no. It was easier for her that way. She smiled faintly, relieved. Dad nodded, as if my response confirmed something he believed about me. Leanne looked down at her plate, already drifting back into the safety of being comforted. I did not argue. I did not push. I did not ask for anything. I let the silence settle, because I understood now that silence was the only language this family ever listened to. I let them think I had accepted everything without a fight. It was easier to let them believe that than to show them what was beginning to form inside me. 2 days before my 18th birthday, everything I had built was erased in a handful of minutes. 2 days before my birthday, I learned exactly where I stood in my family. 2 days before my birthday, the foundation of who I thought I was cracked open quietly. I sat there, saying nothing, letting the cracks spread. And once the silence settled inside me, in a way that felt final, I knew I would not be spending my birthday under that roof. The decision did not arrive in some dramatic flash. It came quietly, like a truth that had been waiting its turn. I stood up from the dinner table, walked to my room, and closed the door gently so no one would ask me why I seemed tense. They had already convinced themselves that I was fine, and I let them believe it, because pushing back had never moved anything in that house. I looked around my room, a space filled with small pieces of me, and I realized I did not need much to leave. I pulled my old backpack from the closet, the one I used for weekend shifts at the shop. I folded a few shirts and jeans, slipped in my toothbrush and the small bottle of lotion my grandmother used to buy me, and tucked my wallet into the front pocket. I left the dress on the bed. I left the shoes in their box. I left the pearl earrings. Those belonged to the version of me who thought someone would celebrate her. I took only what I needed and nothing that would weigh me down. My phone buzzed beside me. I turned it over so the screen faced the mattress. The buzz stopped, and then started again. I pressed the side button until the screen went black. Silence. The kind of silence that felt like a doorway rather than a cage. I did not want to say goodbye to anyone. Goodbye implied a conversation, and I did not owe anyone a performance about how I felt. I did not owe them reassurance. I did not owe them another round of being understanding. I took out the small ring of keys I kept on my desk. One for the front door, one for the back, one for the shop. I separated the house keys, set them on my pillow, and stared at them for a moment. It was strange how easily you could give back something symbolic when the emotional part of it had already been taken from you long before. I texted only one person, Lena. She had been my coworker at the shop for almost a year, and she lived with her aunt, about 15 minutes away. I had opened up to her once or twice about family things, nothing deep, just enough for her to understand that my house was not always the sanctuary people imagined. I asked if she was awake. Her reply came instantly. She asked if I needed a ride. I told her I just needed a place to sleep for a night or two. She said she would leave the side door unlocked and the porch light on. It was enough. I pulled on my jacket and slipped my backpack over my shoulder. I stood in the hallway for a long second. The whole house was dark except for the soft glow coming from under Leanne's door. People think leaving home involves slamming doors or shouting, but sometimes the most permanent exits happen in complete quiet. I walked down the stairs slowly so the wood would not creak. I slipped out the back door, closing it gently until the latch clicked. Outside, the air was cold in a way that stung my cheeks. I walked quickly, partly because of the chill, and partly because I did not want to second-guess myself. The neighborhood was dark and still, except for a single TV flickering through a window down the street. Each step felt unreal, as if I were walking away from a movie set, rather than a life I had lived for 18 years. When I reached the corner, I allowed myself to look back once. The house stood there in perfect calm, as if nothing inside had fractured. The porch light was off. The drapes were drawn. It was the same house it had always been, and yet I felt strangely relieved to no longer be standing inside it. Lena's aunt lived in a small house near Maple Street. The porch light glowed like she promised. I knocked gently, and Lena opened the door with her hair pulled back and a soft sweatshirt hanging loosely around her shoulders. She did not ask questions. Her aunt was asleep, and the house smelled faintly of chamomile and lemon cleaner. Lena pointed to the couch and said she would grab a blanket. I sat down and felt my shoulders release for the first time that day. She brought me a blanket and a pillow, then sat across from me and waited. I thought maybe I would tell her everything, but when I opened my mouth, no words came out. I shrugged and said I just needed space. She nodded like she understood, and I think she did. Some people do not need all the details to grasp the shape of someone's hurt. I stretched out on the couch, the blanket pulling warmly over me, and closed my eyes. It was quiet. A different quiet from the one at home, a softer one that made me feel like I could breathe. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight sliding in through the window. It took me a moment to place where I was. The couch, the blanket, the smell of coffee drifting faintly from the kitchen, my backpack beside me. It all came back slowly. It was my birthday, my 18th birthday, my first morning as a legal adult. I sat there for a long second, waiting for something. Maybe a message, maybe a knock on the door, maybe a sign that someone had noticed I was gone. Nothing came. My phone was still powered off. There were no soft voices calling my name from the hallway, no footsteps approaching my room to wish me a happy birthday, no slice of cake waiting on the kitchen counter. The house I had grown up in did not notice a missing chair at the table. That realization did not crush me the way I thought it might. It felt more like confirmation of something I had already known. My absence did not cause immediate chaos. It did not even cause a ripple. The world inside that house adjusted easily, maybe too easily, to the space I had left behind. Lena's aunt had already gone to work by the time I stepped into the kitchen. Lena handed me a mug of coffee and wished me a quiet, happy birthday. She said it gently, without pity, without that look people give you when they think your family should have done better. Just a simple offering of warmth. I thanked her, and the words caught slightly in my throat. She asked if I planned to stay for the day. I told her I was not sure yet. The truth was, I did not know anything, except that going back home felt impossible. I might have walked out quietly, but inside me, something had slammed shut. I sat there with my coffee, looking out the small window above the sink. Leaves shifted in the wind. A car drove by slowly on its way to somewhere ordinary. People were out there living their lives, and my world had paused in a strange, suspended way. I wondered briefly if Mom had opened my door and seen the keys on the pillow. I wondered if Dad noticed that my shoes were gone. I wondered if Leanne had asked where I was. I did not expect much, and I was not surprised by the silence that followed. I spent the rest of the morning tucked into a quiet corner of the living room, thinking about the night before. The image of Dad canceling everything with a few taps on his phone replayed in my mind. So did the messages from my friends. So did the way Mom kept saying that I would have many more birthdays, like I should be grateful for the chance to give this one up. And the thing that kept coming back to me, steady and sharp, was that I had not mattered in that moment. Not enough to pause, not enough to reconsider, not enough to even ask. By noon, I stepped outside to get some air. The sky was pale, and the air smelled like the beginning of rain. I walked slowly down the block, letting the quiet of the neighborhood settle around me. I wondered if leaving home made me reckless or brave. Maybe both. Maybe neither. Maybe it just made me someone unwilling to disappear under the weight of someone else's feelings. The day moved quietly. No cake, no candles, no celebration. Just a girl on a borrowed couch in a house that was not hers. But I felt lighter than I expected. Sad, yes. Hurt, yes. But also strangely clear. That afternoon, I turned on my phone. My hand shook slightly when the screen lit. No missed calls from Mom, none from Dad. No wave of messages from anyone in the house wondering where I was. Only a few more texts from friends, mostly checking in or asking for clarification. I answered, slowly, choosing my words carefully, keeping the details small. I thanked them for caring. I told them I was safe. I said I needed some time. No one pushed. No one demanded an explanation. By late evening, I lay back on the couch again, listening to the distant hum of cars passing outside. It struck me then that this was the first birthday in my life where no one asked me to make space for someone else's mood. The absence of noise from home told its own story. They had not noticed yet. They had not felt the missing shape of me. Or if they had, it was not important enough to reach out. I was not sure how long the quiet would last, or what it would eventually turn into. But for that moment, I let myself rest in stillness, knowing that the next part of this story would not unfold in the same house where so much of my silence had been learned. Nothing dramatic happened that first morning without me. No frantic calls, no pounding on doors, no sudden search. In their minds, I was still the same girl who had always forgiven quietly. Always returned to my place in the family structure, always made myself smaller to keep the peace. They assumed I would come back, because that had been my role for as long as any of us could remember. Dad spent that morning focused almost entirely on Leanne. She had cried herself into a shallow sleep the night before, but the moment she woke, she found new reasons to fall apart. Lena had texted me later that day, saying she had stopped by the shop and he looked exhausted, trying to cheer Leanne up while packing boxes and wiping down counters. He had always been the type of parent who believed emotional storms could be fixed with enough effort. He brewed the tea she liked, made the breakfast she preferred, and told her she should not blame herself for anything that had gone wrong in her relationship. He spoke softly, putting weight on every word, as if comforting her was his personal responsibility. Mom floated around her the way planets move around the sun. She moved quietly, checking in every few minutes, her concerns circling the same orbit. She helped Leanne wash her face, brought her blankets, and whispered that everything was going to be fine, as long as they stuck together. As a family, I can imagine the way she said it. Mom always had a certain tone reserved for Leanne, the tone that suggested she was the fragile one, the one needing protection. I rarely got that tone. For me, she used the voice meant for competent people who did not need emotional cushioning, people who could handle disappointment without creating a scene. By afternoon, the house had returned to its usual rhythm. Dad went to the shop on Pine Street. Mom stayed home with Leanne, hovering gently. No one had panicked at the sight of my empty room. Mom likely assumed I had gone on a walk or spent the night at a friend's house. Dad probably thought I needed to cool off. They had built such a strong image of me as the stable one that it never crossed their minds that I might be gone by choice. The shop was open as usual. It was a small, warm place, the kind of spot where people knew each other by name. I had worked there since I turned 15, and customers often asked about school or birthdays or weekend plans. Without me there, the space must have felt slightly off, but Dad tried to fill the gap. According to what Lena told me, he told everyone that I was just taking some time for myself. He said it casually, like it was no big deal, like everything was fine. She said he smiled, but it was the tight kind of smile that does not reach a person's eyes. Customers asked where I was. Some were kind enough that their questions came from genuine concern. Others sounded confused because they had expected to see me decorating cookies or ringing up orders. Dad answered vaguely. He said I was staying with a friend. He said I needed rest. He said something about school projects, trying to make it seem ordinary. No one pressed too hard. People tend to accept simple explanations if they are delivered confidently. Mom must have called him at some point, or maybe he called her first. They likely agreed not to make a big deal out of my absence. They had a long history of smoothing over cracks before anyone else could see them. To them, making things look normal was almost as important as things actually being normal. That evening, when Dad returned home, I imagine he walked through the door with the same heavy step he always had after a long day, but the air in the house would have felt lighter without the tension of my disappointment sitting in the room. Leanne was calm for the first time in days. She had eaten something. She had stopped crying long enough to complain that her head hurt. Mom fussed over her, and the house settled into a softness that must have felt familiar. The first small twist in all of this was that they felt relieved I was not there. Not consciously, but in that subtle, unspoken way families sometimes relax when the one who quietly holds resentment finally steps back. Without me, there was no friction, no reminder of the birthday they had canceled, no need to explain or defend their decision. The emotional spotlight returned fully to Leanne without anything dimming it. They had been worried about her for days, and now they could focus entirely on her without worrying about whether I felt overshadowed. They assumed I did not. They assumed I never did. They believed their choice had restored order. They believed I would be back soon, ready to play my part again. I am certain Mom said something reassuring to Dad while they washed dishes, something like Amy understands. She always has. She will come home once she has had a moment to breathe. Dad probably nodded. He believed in predictable patterns. In his mind, I was dependable, steady, simple in my needs. He thought he knew me. The truth was that the house was operating under an illusion. They mistook my silence for acceptance. They mistook my absence for temporary space. They mistook their own comfort for stability. I spent that morning at Lena's kitchen table, eating plain toast and letting the quiet seep into me like sunlight. I checked my phone again and again, expecting something to come through. A call, a message, anything. But nothing came. The longer the silence lasted, the more certain I became that I had made the right choice. At home, they moved from room to room the way they always did. Mom folded laundry. Dad swept the back porch. Leanne scrolled through her phone or stared at a wall, sunk deep in the exhaustion that follows prolonged crying. They were not worried, not yet. The second evening passed without a shift. Dad still had not reached out. Mom had not texted. I understood the psychology behind it even then. If they admitted something felt wrong, they would have to face what they had done. It was easier for them to believe everything was fine. Customers continued asking for me the next day. Dad kept his answers vague. Maybe he even believed them. Maybe he convinced himself that I needed space. In their minds, I would come home by the weekend. In their minds, this was a small blip, a momentary crack that would seal itself once emotions smoothed out. Leanne asked about me once, not out of concern, but out of curiosity. She asked Mom whether I was staying at a friend's place. Mom said yes. She said I was taking time to myself. Leanne accepted that easily, probably relieved that she did not need to face me yet. She had always been uncomfortable when confronted with the consequences of her actions, even if those consequences were directed at someone else. Mom reassured her again, the way she always did. By the end of that second day, a strange and quiet relief had settled in the house. Without me there, without the awkwardness of what they had done hovering between us, the emotional balance they preferred was restored. Mom and Dad did not say it out loud, but they felt lighter. Leanne felt supported. The house felt calm. In their minds, this was proof that their decision had been the right one. They believed they had protected the family from conflict. They did not understand yet that the calm they felt was only the surface of something deeper. Something is shifting, something they could not see because they had never looked closely at the fractures beneath their own habits. I spent that evening sitting outside on Lena's small back porch. The air was cool and the sky was darkening into a blue that felt endless. I could hear faint traffic from the main road and the soft rustling of leaves against the fence. I breathed deeper than I had in months. No one was telling me to lower my voice. No one was telling me to let things go. No one was telling me to be a bigger person. I let the quiet settle again. Not the silence of suppression, but the silence of choosing myself. Back home, they went to bed, believing everything would go back to normal in the morning. They believed I would walk through the door with an apology or an explanation. They believed they could hold on to the story that our family was fine. They did not know that sometimes the absence of panic is not proof of stability. Sometimes it is just the calm before something much larger begins to unravel. I had learned early that sometimes the absence of panic is not proof of stability. Sometimes it is just the calm before something larger begins to unravel. And although I could not see what was happening inside that house in real time, the cracks were already forming in places they never expected. The first signs did not show up in dramatic arguments or late-night phone calls. They showed up in the place where I had spent most of my teenage years, the place that had once felt almost like a second home. His little shop on Pine Street, the one I had helped run since I was 15. I started working there long before I was officially hired. I had been a kid who wandered behind the counter to stack napkins or wipe tables, simply because I liked being near the sound of people talking. I learned how to steam milk before I had learned how to drive. I learned which customers preferred their pastry warmed and which ones hated foam on their latte. I did not think of it as a skill. It was just a habit. I remembered faces. I remembered names. I remembered stories that people told while waiting for their order. If he had built the shop with his hands, I would have helped stitch the place together with small threads of connection. By the time I turned 15, customers would ask for me specifically. They liked the way I remembered details, the silly things like vacation dates or which grandchild had just started school. I was not the best barista, and I was certainly not the fastest, but I was the one people looked for when they walked in. He used to say I had a way of making people feel seen. He said it casually, in the same tone he used when telling me to clean the syrup bottles, but I used to hang on to that comment like it was a little metal. So when I stopped showing up, people noticed before Mom or Dad did. For the first few days, he tried to patch the empty space by working longer hours. He told customers I was visiting friends or that school was demanding more of my attention. Lena told me this later, describing it gently, as if she worried the truth might sting. She said he tried to keep the mood light, but the customers saw through it. People who came every morning hesitated at the door when they realized I was not behind the counter. A few asked where I was, some did not. They simply ordered quietly and left. The shop had always been a small social hub, not because of the coffee itself, but because of the way people felt when they walked in. Without me there, the warmth thinned. You could not see it on the surface, but it was shifting below, like sand washing out from under a porch. The more days I stayed away, the clearer the difference became. He began asking Leanne to help. He framed it in that gentle tone he used when he needed her cooperation. She had never worked there before. Not really. She had stopped by sometimes after school, or dropped in when she needed extra cash. But she had never learned the rhythms of the place. She was 23 and still thought the world rearranged itself based on how she felt each morning. The first day she showed up to help, she stayed behind the counter with her arms crossed. She did not greet customers. She barely acknowledged the regulars unless they forced her attention. When someone asked how she was doing, she answered with a dry shrug. A few people thought she was just having a rough day. Regulars tend to be forgiving, but only up to a point. Lena told me that on the second day, a woman named Mrs. Clark walked in and scanned the room for me instinctively. When she did not see me, she looked confused. She asked him whether I was all right. He gave her the same vague answer. He said I was taking some time for myself. Mrs. Clark nodded, but Lena told me she had seen the tension on her face. People like her had known me since I was 14. I had helped her carry pastries to her car when she broke her wrist. She used to tell me about her grandchildren while I boxed her scones. That sort of thing matters to people. They connect where they feel welcome. And when that welcome disappears, they drift. A few days passed before the first small fracture became visible. A man named Tom, who had come in every weekday for nearly 2 years, stopped showing up. I had memorized his order by heart. Medium latte, 1 sugar, no lid, because he said lids made coffee taste metallic. Tom was the kind of man who stuck to routine. So when he suddenly vanished, it was noticeable. Another regular, a woman who always brought her small dog in a carrier, began ordering to go instead of sitting down. She stopped chatting with him. She paid quickly and slipped out. By the end of that week, Lena texted me, saying something felt wrong at the shop. She said he looked strained, like he was trying to keep things from falling apart with his bare hands. She said Leanne complained constantly, rolling her eyes at customers, acting irritated when someone asked for something extra. Even when she tried, she did not have the patience for service work. Linda, another coworker, told me privately that she caught Leanne snapping at an older man for asking whether they still had the lemon loaf. She said the way he flinched was enough to make her stomach drop. I wanted to be surprised, but I was not. Leanne had never liked doing anything that did not put her at the center of attention. She did not understand that customer work was not about being admired. It was about being steady, patient, present, the kind of qualities she had never needed to develop because someone had always swooped in to spare her from discomfort. Once Leanne's attitude settled over the shop like a thin fog, the quiet exits began. Regulars started going elsewhere, not dramatically, not with confrontations or angry words. They simply stopped coming. First 1, then 2 more. Then a small group that often met on Fridays migrated to a new cafe down the street. He saw the shift but did not understand it. He kept wiping down counters and trying to make the space feel normal. The real moment came one afternoon, the one Lena recounted to me in detail because she knew I needed to hear it. A woman named Karen, a sweet retired teacher who always tipped generously, came in and asked gently whether I would be back soon. Before he could answer, Leanne cut in with a sigh, saying something close to her is fine, and people need to relax. Karen's face changed. Just a small tightening around her eyes, but it was enough. She ordered a tea, waited quietly for it, and left. Lena said she had not been back since. Dad felt that one. He tried to cover it with a smile, but the moment Karen walked out, he hesitated. He wiped the counter twice in the same spot. He looked at the door longer than necessary. He understood something had shifted, even if he could not yet name it. Still, he did not call me. He had always been stubborn about asking for help. He believed he could fix things by working harder or talking himself into optimism. He believed customers left because they were busy, not because the soul of the shop had been punctured. He believed the edges would smooth out once emotions at home settled. That belief was the same one that had blinded him to the slow erosion happening under our roof, long before my birthday fell apart. That week, Lena kept sending updates, each one gentler than the last. She told me my dad seemed tired, not physically tired, but worn in the way people get when the world they built starts shifting beneath their feet. She said Leanne showed up less and less because she could not handle rude customers, even though most of them were not rude. They were just confused, thrown off by the change in atmosphere. People feel those things. They feel when a place loses its warmth. They feel when the person they connected with is suddenly gone without explanation. Dad tried to fill the silence with extra conversation. He asked customers how their day was going. He offered samples of pastries. He turned the music up slightly louder than usual. But none of it worked the way my presence once had. You cannot rebuild something when you do not understand what held it together in the first place. I should have felt guilty, but I did not. Maybe I should have. Maybe the part of me trained to absorb everyone else's discomfort wanted to step in and fix it. But I knew better. I had spent years providing emotional glue that no one acknowledged, years of smoothing moments so others could feel steady, years of becoming invisible so someone else's mood could take priority. And he still did not call me. And that silence, as painful as it should have been, told me everything I needed to know about my place in that house. I was gone, and they were still pretending everything was fine. But inside that house, The air had begun to shift in ways they could not smooth over. The place had always survived on the quiet I used to keep between people. I filled in gaps without anyone noticing, patched small tensions before they grew, softened moods that could have cracked the walls. Once I stepped away, the silence loosened, and everything they had ignored for years rose to the surface. It started with Mom. She had always been a woman who moved fast through the day, wiping down counters while talking over her shoulder, folding laundry with crisp little snaps of fabric, checking the time as if the world depended on her staying ahead of it. But the week after I left, her body slowed. Not dramatically, not in a way that required sirens or panic. It was the kind of deep tiredness that seeps in little by little until one morning you wake up and cannot push yourself through it anymore. Lena told me later that she had seen Mom pressing her hand against her side whenever she thought no one was looking. One morning, she grew dizzy while loading the dryer and had to sit down. Dad rushed over and guided her to a kitchen chair. Leanne hovered for a moment, offering thin concern, then slipped back into her usual place as the one who was cared for, not the one who cared. Mom insisted she was fine, but he still drove her to the clinic. The doctor ran some tests, asked questions, and told her nothing was dangerously wrong, but she needed actual rest. Real rest. Not pretending rest was taken while she continued doing chores. He told her she needed help at home. Someone patient, someone steady, someone who paid attention to tiny details, someone who would slow down for her. That had been my role, and I doubt they understood that fully until the moment I was no longer there. With Mom needing care, the house grew louder. Every little thing became a source of friction. He tried to pick up the slack, but years of relying on me had left him unprepared for the small, daily things that keep a place running. Laundry piled up, grocery bags stayed on the counter too long, dishes stacked faster than he could wash them. He burned a pan trying to make eggs and muttered under his breath as he scrubbed it. He forgot to pick up Mom's medication until the pharmacy called to remind him. Leanne hated the idea of caregiving. She tried for an afternoon. She brought Mom a glass of water and sighed as if lifting it drained her. She groaned at dishes but left them where they were. When Mom asked her to sit with her because she felt faint, Leanne said she had a headache and needed rest, then disappeared into her room. Without me there to cushion things, the house erupted in small pockets of tension. Dad asked her to help with laundry, and she complained that the detergent irritated her hands. He asked her to run to the store, and she said she was too tired. When he told her Mom needed company, she snapped that she was not a nurse. The sound carried down the hallway, raised voices, sharp tempers, doors closing harder than necessary. They had depended on me to absorb emotional shock, to keep things smooth, to bridge gaps they refused to acknowledge. Without that bridge, the cracks became undeniable. One afternoon, he tried to follow a list Mom wrote for him. Pick up vegetables, prep chicken, clean the bathroom. At the shop, he could juggle 10 tasks without blinking. But at home, the rhythm was different. He washed vegetables but forgot to cut them. He put the chicken in the oven without checking the temperature. He cleaned the bathroom but left the mop in a puddle on the floor. That was where I used to step in quietly, picking up mistakes without being asked. Lena told me that when he dropped by the shop for supplies, even customers noticed he looked different, distracted, dropping his keys, rubbing his forehead. He was not the steady man they expected to see behind the counter. Stress had carved new lines into his face. A small piece of karma arrived one evening, when a neighbor stopped by with a casserole for Mom. She had known us for years and believed kindness was something best delivered warm and in a foil pan. He accepted it with relief because it meant one less task that night. She asked softly if he needed help with anything around the house. Dad, proud as ever, said he had things under control. She glanced past him into the living room where a pile of blankets sat unfolded. She asked if he wanted help with laundry. Something in his expression changed then. Not quite shame, not quite irritation, something closer to a truth he did not want to speak aloud. He told her that I usually took care of those things. The neighbor raised her eyebrows gently. She said she figured as much because the house felt different. Then she asked whether I was planning to come home soon. Lena told me he stood still for a long second before answering. He said I was staying with a friend, that I needed time. The neighbor nodded, but her eyes lingered on him, full of meaning he could not dodge. She said he must appreciate how much I did. He did not answer. He just thanked her and closed the door with quiet hands. That night, he sat at the table with his head in his hands while the casserole cooled beside him. He had always believed himself to be the strong one, the pillar, but now he finally saw what he had missed. I had not just been helpful, I had been essential. Mom, still tired and moving carefully, noticed the strain in him. She asked how he was holding up, and he brushed her off, saying they only needed time to adjust. She watched him for a long moment, before saying she had not realized how much I had done. He nodded once, but the truth was heavy inside him. Leanne grew irritated with the new dynamic. She complained that the house felt stressful, that she hated the smell of cleaning supplies, that she could not get rest because Mom called her name too often. When he asked her to run an errand, she muttered that none of this was her fault. He snapped at her again, not loudly, but with a firmness she had never heard from him. He told her she was not the only one who mattered. Mom looked at him with surprise. She had not heard that tone directed at Leanne before. My absence had created a vacuum, and the weight had shifted entirely onto them. As the days passed, the noise inside the house changed from simple frustration to something deeper, a restless discomfort that made every room feel too small. He went to the shop one morning and realized a group of regulars had started, visiting another cafe. Lena tried to make excuses for them, but he knew better. He saw hesitation in customers who used to linger. He noticed the soft drop in sales he had once ignored. At home, he tried to prepare dinner again. He sliced vegetables unevenly, burned chicken, and spilled pasta. Mom tried to help, but could not stand long. Leanne complained the kitchen smelled awful. He finally told her to stop thinking only of herself. She went silent, stunned. That night, he sat alone after everyone went to bed. He looked around and saw the missing pieces. The blanket draped wrong, the stack of mail I used to sort, the empty space where my mug always sat, the absence of my quiet humming while I worked. He finally understood that the house had not been balanced by accident. I had balance, not because I was the youngest, but because I had always been the quiet one. Quiet people make good shock absorbers. They make life easier for everyone else. Their absence is not loud at first, but it echoes, and the echo had grown louder each day. Still, no one called me. His punishment did not come from shouting or blame. It came from the slow, unrelenting truth settling into him. He had valued the wrong things. He had leaned too heavily on someone who had been giving without recognition. The house kept getting louder without me, but the loudest sound was the truth. He had finally begun to understand what my presence had meant and what my absence was going to cost. My world had become quiet enough that I almost forgot how loud my sister could be when she wanted something. I woke up that morning in Carol's small house, feeling rested in a way I had not felt in years. I planned to take a walk before heading to the bookstore. The sun was warm for late spring, and the air carried that soft smell of blooming trees. Everything in this neighborhood felt calmer than the big house I grew up in. I stepped outside with a travel mug of coffee and had barely taken 3 steps when I heard my name slice through the morning air. It was sharp, dragged out, soaked in urgency. Amy. I froze. That tone had followed me my whole life. I turned slowly, and there she was, Leanne, striding toward me from the end of the block, fast and wild-eyed, like someone chasing a fleeing truth. Her shoulders were tight. Her face was blotchy, the way it got when she had been crying or yelling or both. When her eyes locked on me, she sped up, almost desperate. For a split second, I considered stepping back inside, but something stubborn inside me held my feet where they were. She stopped right in front of me, chest rising and falling as she tried to catch her breath. Before I could say anything, she grabbed my wrist. The grip was sharp, not affectionate, not pleading, possessive, controlling. Like she was afraid I would slip through her fingers. "You need to come with me right now." Her voice was tight and strained. People on the sidewalk slowed. A man walking his dog glanced over. I kept my voice calm even though my pulse jumped. "Leanne, let go of my arm." She did not. "You have to come home. Everything is falling apart. Mom is sick. The shop is a mess. Dad is losing it. And you did this. You blew up the family because you could not handle one small change of plans." There it was, The old script. My responsibility for everything. Even the things I had nothing to do with. Her fingers dug deeper into my wrist. Leanne let go of my arm. She leaned closer until I could feel her breath. Do you understand that you are ruining everything? You left us to drown while you ran away and played the victim. You owe us. You are coming home. A woman carrying grocery bags slowed her steps. A college kid paused his bike. Leanne did not notice anyone but me. She never had. In her mind, the world rearranged itself around her emotions. I looked her straight in the eye. I do not owe you anything. Not anymore. She dropped my wrist then, but only because she wanted both hands free to gesture wildly. She stepped back, shaking with frustration. Do you hear yourself? Mom is sick. Dad can barely keep the shop running. Everyone is falling apart, and you are standing here drinking coffee like nothing is. Wrong. I felt the throbbing in my wrist, but kept my tone level. I am drinking coffee because I live here now. I am building a life that does not rely on me playing the emotional shock absorber. Be angry if you want. Blame me if it helps. But I am not coming back. Leanne let out a laugh that cracked in the middle. People on the sidewalk stepped even farther away. You think you can just leave and pretend you are some kind of saint who finally had enough? You are the selfish one. It has always been you. I lost Mark. I lost my friends. I lost everything. And you still wanted a birthday party. I felt something inside me click into place then. She was rewriting the story in front of strangers, positioning herself as the tragic center. But the morning sun was warm on my face, and the girl who used to shrink under her voice was gone. She reached for my wrist again, but someone stepped between us before she could touch me. It was the older woman with grocery bags. She placed herself firmly in Leanne's line of sight. Honey, she said. No. Leanne stared at her like she had slapped her. This is a family matter. Stay out of it. The woman did not move an inch. Not when you are grabbing her on a public sidewalk. And not when you are yelling like she owes you something. A small crowd had begun to form. No one said a word, but I felt them watching, their silence heavy with judgment. Leanne turned back to me, and for the first time, I saw panic crack through her anger. Dad yelled at me yesterday. He told me to get my attitude together. He said if I want help, I need to stop acting like a child. He has never talked to me like that. Ever. The confession tumbled out of her in a rush. It was the closest she had come to acknowledging the shift in our house. I felt something twist inside me. No pity. Not satisfied. Something distant and aching for a sister I had once hoped I could trust. I said nothing. Leanne's face hardened. So now you see it. Everything is a disaster. You have to come home and fix it. You are the one who kept the peace. You are the one who handled everything. Without you, it all falls apart. There it was, the truth behind everything she had been yelling. She never wanted me. She wanted my labor, my quiet, my ability to swallow conflict whole. She stepped closer. Come home, please. I need you to take care of Mom. I need you at the shop. I cannot do this. And Dad is losing patience. If you do not come back now, he might do something drastic. For a moment, I saw her clearly. Not as a villain. As a girl who had never learned to stand without leaning on someone else. A girl raised to believe that love was something she received, not something she practiced. I finally responded. I am not coming back, Leanne. Not today. Not to fix the shop. Not to take care of Mom. Not to be the buffer that keeps you from growing up. She stared at me like I had struck her. You are abandoning us. You are abandoning me. I shook my head. No, I left because you and Dad made it clear I did not matter. And now you want me back because you finally feel the consequences of that. A teenager rolled past on a skateboard and slowed down to watch. The man with the dog stood still. Eyes narrowed. The older woman held her grocery bags like a shield. Leanne's voice cracked. Everyone is talking about me. At Mark's gym, they say I treated you terribly. His sister told people I ruined your birthday. Customers at the shop say I am rude. Do you know how humiliating this is? The words spilled out of her like she had been carrying them too long. It was the first real glimpse of accountability trying to force its way in. A tiny fracture in the version of herself she had been clinging to, I said quietly. That is not because of me. It is because of how you treated me. People are just seeing it now. She wiped her face with her sleeve. For just a moment, she looked like the older sister who used to braid my hair on mornings when she felt generous. Then the softness vanished, and the anger returned. You will regret this. You think this new life will save you. You think you are better than us. I lifted my chin. No, I think I am finally equal, and I think you hate that. That line sliced right through her. She stared as if she no longer recognized me at all. Then she spun around and stormed down the sidewalk. People watched her go, their expressions a mixture of shock and disapproval. I stood there until she reached the corner and vanished. My wrist pulsed in the warm air where she had grabbed me. The older woman gave me a small nod before heading on her way. The man with the dog glanced back and said quietly, "Take care of yourself." I walked back inside Carol's house, closed the door, and leaned against it. My heart was pounding hard enough to make my ribs throb, but my mind was steady, clear. The confrontation was over. Leanne had shown me exactly how far she would go to pull me back into the chaos, and I had shown her the old version of me was gone. I set my coffee on the counter and let the silence fill the room. Sunlight stretched across the floor in long, soft lines. For the first time since leaving home, I felt the weight lift completely from my shoulders. What I did not know then was that Leanne's outburst on the sidewalk had not only shaken her, it had sent ripples straight back into the house I used to live in. And those ripples found their way to me through the one person who had opened her door without hesitation when I needed somewhere to go. Carol. It was late afternoon, a few days after the confrontation. The air was still warm, but the light had shifted in that golden way that made everything look softer. I was sitting at her small kitchen table with a stack of community college brochures, trying to figure out whether I wanted to apply for fall classes or wait a semester. It was the first time in my life that decisions were about what I wanted instead of what someone else needed. I was circling a date on one of the forms when I heard a knock at the front door. It was quick and nervous, like the person on the other side was debating whether to run. Carol opened it, and I heard her voice lift in surprise. "Oh, hi." Then another voice floated in. My dad's coworker from the shop, a kind older man named Howard, who had always slipped me extra muffins when I was little. I froze in place as soon as I recognized him. He was the last person I expected, and the last one I wanted to be involved in. He asked quietly, "Is she here?" Carol hesitated. Then she stepped aside and said, "You can come in, but be gentle." She has been through a lot. I stayed seated because standing felt too much like fleeing. Howard stepped into the kitchen, took off his baseball cap, and held it between his hands like he was afraid to wrinkle it. His voice was soft when he spoke. "Hey, kid." I told him hello, quietly. He looked relieved just seeing me. He said, "Your dad asked me to check on you. He said you have not been answering calls, and your mom has not heard from you. They want to know if you are safe." He said the words, but I heard what was missing. He never asked, "Are you happy?" or "Are you treated well?" or "Do you want to come home?" It was only, "Are you safe?" The bare minimum one might ask a stranger. I swallowed. "I am fine, Howard." He nodded, but he looked uncomfortable, like he was carrying a message that weighed more than he had expected. He shifted the hat in his hands before speaking again. "Your dad said the house is under a lot of pressure. Your mom is not doing great. The shop is struggling. And he said Leanne is overwhelmed." He sighed like he hated being the messenger. He said, "They need you home." The words felt like stones dropping into my chest one by one. Not a single part of that message was about me. Not one question about how I felt. Not a single acknowledgement of what I had gone through. It was a list of tasks that needed doing. A description of a machine with one missing part. I kept my voice calm. "Howard, I know you mean well, but I am not going back. Not now." He looked pained. He rubbed his forehead. "I figured you might say that. But your dad asked me to try. He said you always listened to me when you were younger. That stung more than he knew. They wanted to use my childhood loyalty like a tool. I straightened in my chair. I appreciate that you came, but I left because they made it clear I was not important except for what I did. Nothing has changed. Carol stayed by the counter, arms crossed, quietly protective. Howard exhaled. I did not want to get in the middle of this. I really didn't. I said, "You are not in the middle. You are just delivering a message, and I am just giving you mine. I am not coming home to carry everything again." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded, defeated. "I understand, Amy. At least, more than they do." He put his cap back on and walked toward the door. But before he stepped outside, he turned back. "When your dad told me why you left, he said you got upset and ran out. He said it like you had thrown a tantrum or something. But when I asked what happened that night, when I asked why he canceled your birthday, he went quiet." My stomach twisted. "And then?" I asked. Howard looked at me with sadness and told me he had seen the truth behind the words. He said eventually he admitted it. He said your sister was hurting, and the family needed to stay unified. When I asked where that left you, he said something that did not sit right with me. He said Amy will come around. I felt something cold and steady spread through me. Of course that was his story. I was the reliable one, the one who adjusted, the one who yielded, the one who came around. I asked how people would react when they heard this. Howard gave a humorless smile. They did not say much. You know how people get when they hear something that does not sound right, but they do not want to make a scene. A few folks just got quiet. One woman said she was sorry to hear it, and then changed the subject so fast it was like whiplash. Another man said he always thought you were a good kid and then walked away before your dad could answer. Then Howard added, the silence said more than any comment could have. Your dad looked uncomfortable. It was the first time I have seen him hesitate when talking about his family. There it was. Karma without fire or shouting. No dramatic punishment, just a man realizing the story he used to brag about had lost its shine. The perfect family image he liked to polish was no longer matching what people saw, and people's silence was heavier than judgment. Howard sighed. I think he wanted me to come back with news that you were on your way home. I am sorry I cannot give him that. I shook my head. Do not be sorry. You were kind to come. But I am not going back to be the glue again. He smiled gently. You deserve a life that is more than patching up other people's mistakes. He stepped out and closed the door behind him. Carol sat across from me after he left. She looked at me with this soft understanding. They really do not see you, do they? I let out a long, slow breath. They see what I do, not who I am. That realization settled over me like a blanket made of both sadness and relief. I knew it was true. I had always felt it, but hearing it out loud, hearing the proof in someone else's message, made everything crystal clear. Over the next week, the attempts to reach me came more frequently, but always through someone else. Dad never called himself. Mom never sent a direct text. Leanne never apologized. Instead, small waves of messages passed through mutual acquaintances. Your mom needs someone patient around her. Your dad is stretched thin. The shop will not survive without more hands. Leanne says she is falling apart. Not once did anyone ask Amy, how are you sleeping? Amy, do you need anything? Amy, are you okay? Their need for me had nothing to do with me. And then something new happened. Carol came home one evening, looking unsettled. She told me that she ran into someone from the shop while she was at the grocery store. The woman had asked if I was doing all right. Carol said yes, that I was finding my footing. The woman hesitated before saying, your dad told people you left after a family disagreement and that you might come home soon. Carol asked, what disagreement? The woman shrugged and said he did not explain. When Carol told me this, I felt an ache in my chest that I could not describe. Dad was still trying to gloss over everything, still hoping to preserve an image that no longer existed, still believing that the less he said, the better it would look. But the world around him had shifted. People no longer smiled with easy familiarity. They no longer assumed everything was fine inside that house. They had seen Leanne snapping at customers. They had watched me disappear right after my birthday with no celebration and no explanation. They had heard the strain in his voice. The silence of others was beginning to close in on him. I wondered if Dad would tell anyone about that part. Probably not. It did not fit the story he wanted to keep. That afternoon, Carol found me in the living room, staring out the window at the garden she had planted long before I arrived. She asked how I was feeling. I told her I felt strange, like I was floating between two worlds that both expected something from me. She sat beside me. You know, sometimes families miss the role you played long before they ever miss the person you are. It is a painful truth, but it is also the beginning of freedom. I let those words settle into me like seeds. Another 2 days passed before there was a final attempt to reach me. This time through a neighbor I barely knew. She stopped by Carol's place and said politely that Dad had mentioned they were, hoping I would come home. Then, with a look that said she did not fully believe what she had been told, the neighbor added, "Your dad said you left after an emotional misunderstanding, but he did not sound confident when he said it." She hesitated, then asked gently, "Is that really what happened?" My face must have told her the answer. She nodded, almost relieved to know the truth was more complicated. Before leaving, she said quietly, "People are talking, you know. Not in a cruel way, just in a way that makes it clear they know you were not treated fairly." After she left, I sat alone in the living room, the house quiet and steady around me. Birds called outside. A lawnmower hummed down the street. Normal sounds. Everyday sounds. None of them demanded anything from me. I thought about how Dad had been forced to describe my absence in public, how he had stumbled, how he had finally admitted the truth to Howard, how the silence of others had pressed down on him like a fog he could not escape. He had built his pride on being the steady father, the man with the close-knit family, and now that story had cracks big enough for the whole town to see through. He was learning, slowly and quietly, that the absence of one person can change the entire shape of a home. And I was learning that I was not invisible. I had simply been standing in the wrong place. Later that evening, I sat outside on the small back porch. The sky had turned soft blue, and the breeze carried the smell of freshly cut grass. I wrapped my hands around a warm mug and felt something settle deep inside me. They did not miss me. They missed what I did. That truth kept echoing in my mind for days. But instead of weighing me down, it made space for something new. Something I had not felt in a very long time. A small, cautious kind of hope. I woke one morning and realized I no longer checked my phone to see if my family had called. I no longer waited for an apology that would never come. My life had begun to move in a different direction. Slowly at first, like a river thawing after a long winter. I had taken the part-time job at the little bookstore near the center of town. It was a narrow shop with tall shelves that seemed to lean forward like they were, eager to share secrets. Working there felt strangely natural. Customers greeted me with warmth. The regulars remembered my name. No one snapped at me or demanded I manage their emotions. If someone was upset, it had nothing to do with me. If someone was happy, it was because they found the right book. For the first time, I felt like a person instead of a buffer. One afternoon, about a week after Leanne confronted me on the street, my coworker Mia leaned across the counter and asked with a grin, "So, when is your actual birthday?" I told her it had passed. She blinked. "Did you celebrate?" I hesitated. I told her, not really, not this year. She tilted her head like she was trying to understand something that did not quite make sense. Then she said quietly, "Then we owe you one." I thought she was joking, but 2 days later, I arrived for my shift and found a small banner taped above the older counter. It was made from scrap paper cut into uneven triangles. Someone had written, "Happy birthday, Amy," in bright blue marker, the letters slightly crooked. On the table beside the register sat a tiny cake with uneven frosting. Mia appeared from behind a shelf holding a handful of candles. She said we did the best we could. "You get 3 wishes." I stood there, staring at that little circle of people. There was no drama in the room. No guilt, no resentment. No one asked me to make myself smaller so someone else could shine. They were simply glad I existed. The simplicity of it hit me harder than anything my family had done in years. They asked me what I wanted for my birthday, as if the answer mattered. And for once, it did. We lit the candles. They sang to me, off-key and too loudly, and I laughed in a way that made my chest ache. When I blew out the candles, I felt the smallest spark of joy slip into the space where resentment had once lived. Later that evening, after I finished my shift, I walked home with the leftovers of the cake in a small box. The street was glowing with warm lights. Dogs barked somewhere in the distance. A group of teens skated past. Everything felt normal and peaceful. My hands were sticky with frosting, and my heart felt strangely light. But miles away, in the house I used to call home, a very different birthday celebration was taking place. I heard about it from Carol later that night. She had run into a mutual acquaintance at the grocery store. This woman explained that Leanne's birthday was coming up soon, and Dad and Mom insisted on throwing her something small to cheer her up. According to the woman, no one seemed particularly excited. The event felt more like an obligation than a celebration. They set up decorations in the living room, but the air was tense. Mom was exhausted. Dad was stretched thin. Leanne tried to act cheerful, but the strain showed around her eyes. She had already burned bridges with many friends after her messy behavior over the past months. Even Mark's sister, who once defended her, told people it was a blessing the breakup happened early. On the night of the small gathering, only a handful of people showed up. Not close friends, more like acquaintances who felt they had to attend. They gave polite smiles, but there was no real warmth. No one asked Leanne what she wanted or how they could make the day special. They mostly talked among themselves and offered stiff compliments. Someone said lightly, "So, is her sister coming tonight?" Dad stiffened and said, "Amy does not live here anymore." The room grew quieter. Another person asked, "What happened?" Dad's jaw tightened. He said she left after a disagreement. The conversation died again. No one nodded in sympathy. No one leaned in. The pause. Leanne looked around the room like she was a performer who had forgotten her lines. The tension was thick enough to taste. Carol told me that at some point during the party, Leanne stepped outside to cry. Her mascara ran down her cheeks in dark streaks. She kept saying, "Everyone is turning against me." Dad finally lost his patience. He followed her into the yard, and for the first time in her life, he raised his voice at her. From what Carol heard, he told her, "You are not the center of everything anymore. You cannot act like this and expect people to stay." Leanne had never heard that tone from him, not once. She broke down crying even harder. Mom tried to soothe her, but she was worn out too. She did not have the strength to coddle Leanne like she used to. She told Leanne quietly, "You need to get a hold of yourself. We cannot keep going like this." Inside, people whispered about Leanne's behavior. Someone mentioned they had seen her yelling at a customer at the shop. Another person said their cousin refused to return because she made them uncomfortable. The party eventually drifted to an awkward end, and guests slipped out quickly, relieved to escape the tension. Back at the bookstore, my birthday ended with soft laughter, shared cake, and a walk home under streetlights. Across town, Leanne's birthday ended with slammed doors, tears, and uncomfortable silence. The contrast was sharp enough to cut. At the shop, customers greeted me by name. Mia brought me a scarf she thought I would like. Henry asked if I was settling into the new schedule. A college student came in looking for a poetry book and asked what my favorite was. I felt included, not because I made anyone's life easier, but because I was a part of something that did not ask me to disappear. Meanwhile, my old home had become a place where noise replaced connection. David grew more irritable as the financial situation worsened. Mom struggled with her health and had no one with the temperament to help her rest. Leanne kept trying to force the world to return to what it had been before I left, but nothing was going back. Her new boyfriend broke up with her after 2 months because he could not handle the emotional storms. Her friends stopped tiptoeing around her feelings. They stopped centering her in every conversation. Someone finally told her, "You cannot keep treating people this way." It was the beginning of the shift she had needed for years. But growth is painful, And for someone who had always been protected from consequences, it was excruciating. For weeks after that, things stayed steady. I worked my shifts. I shared small jokes with Mia and Henry. I helped customers find books that reminded them of childhood summers or brought comfort after long days. My world was quiet and gentle. And then one morning, while shelving new arrivals near the back wall, I felt a strange sense of lightness. It was not exactly a relief, not exactly closure. It was something between them, a recognition. I had survived the breaking, and now I was living in the space beyond it. The fallout at my old home kept drifting to me in bits and pieces, not because I sought it out, but because this was a small town and people talked without meaning to. A customer would step into the shop and mention that my dad seemed worn down. Another would say they had not seen Leanne in a while. Carol told me she heard that Mom had finally convinced him to hire outside help for the evenings, because neither she nor Leanne could manage the strain anymore. Every piece came to me like a leaf on the wind. Light, but carrying meaning. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel vindicated. Instead, I felt something quieter, something almost sorrowful, but steadier than grief. I understood now that their collapse did not come from my absence. It came from the years before, when they depended on me so heavily that removing me revealed the structure they had been ignoring. I had not broken anything. I had simply stepped away from a load I should never have been carrying. One afternoon, as I was wiping the counter, Henry asked how life was treating me. I told him the truth. It was beginning to feel like mine. He smiled in that thoughtful way of his. He said, "Sometimes people think the strongest thing you can do is stay, but sometimes the strongest thing is knowing when to walk away." That sentence sat with me for days. Around that same time, Leanne finally faced the consequences she had been dodging for years. Her behavior had pushed most of her friends away. The last two who still tolerated her drifted off after she snapped at them during brunch. The man she had started seeing after Mark left ended things by saying he could not keep up with the drama. She had always believed people would adjust around her. Now she was learning that adults rarely do. David, worn thin by the shop and the growing tension at home, finally raised his voice at her. That alone traveled quickly through town. He had always been gentle with Leanne, always smoothing the path, always excusing the worst days as sensitivity. But now he told her to stop acting like the world owed her something. Mom, tired and not well, no longer had the energy to cushion the blow. For the first time, Leanne stood without a safety net, and it forced her to see herself in a way she never had. I did not feel satisfied. I felt distant, a clean cut between then and now. One evening after close, I sat on the sidewalk outside the shop and watched the town move around me. Kids on bikes rode past. An older man walked his tiny dog. A couple argued quietly about dinner plans. The world was so wonderfully ordinary, and I realized something important. The life I was building did not revolve around the absence of my family. It revolved around the presence of my own choices. I remembered standing in my childhood kitchen, 2 days before my 18th, watching my plans be erased because Leanne had cried for 3 days straight. I remembered Dad canceling everything without looking at me. I remembered Mom saying I should understand. I remembered the feeling of shrinking inside my own skin, like I was becoming smaller to make room for someone else's pain. But I also remembered walking out, quietly, without a speech, without a fight, without begging them to see me. Just leaving. At the time, it had felt like a failure. Now I understood it had been the first real boundary I ever drew in my life. One Saturday evening, Carol and I sat on her porch while the sun dipped low behind the trees. She handed me a cup of tea and said she had bumped into someone who used to visit the shop back when I lived with my parents. This woman had asked how I was and whether I missed home. Carol said she told her the truth. You are building something new, something healthier. I nodded. I did not miss home. I missed the idea of a home I never actually had. The next morning, while ironing a shirt for work, I found myself thinking about forgiveness. Not the version where you forget the hurt or pretend it did not matter, but the version where you release the expectation that people will become what they have never been. A gentle letting go. I realized that I had forgiven them without meaning to. Not in words, in the distance, in living differently. News kept trickling in. The shop was still open, but barely. Dad had hired someone new to help part-time. Mom's health had steadied, but she stayed quiet, more reflective. Leanne had begun attending counseling sessions after a friend suggested it, the first real step she had taken on her own. When I heard that, I felt something shift inside me. Not hope, exactly, but openness, a softening. People can change, sometimes only when they reach the edge. But I did not feel the need to go back or explain myself. My absence had already finished speaking. One afternoon, I took a long walk through the park near the bookstore. The air smelled like pine and warm earth. Parents watched toddlers wobble across the grass. Teenagers lay on blankets, sharing headphones. I sat on a bench and let myself breathe in the life around me. For years, I had thought family was defined by blood and obligation. But now I understand that family could also be quiet laughter around a bookstore, counter, or a simple birthday banner made from scrap paper, or someone telling you without hesitation you deserve better. Somewhere else, I had been chosen, and that made all the difference. I thought about the night everything changed. My 18th birthday. The cupcakes I had frosted never left the counter. The invitations I had sent, the moment Leanne said, "If I cannot be happy, then she cannot either," and how Dad agreed without even meeting my eyes. For a long time, I believed that moment had ended everything. But now I see it differently. That night had begun my life, not because it was dramatic, not because it hurt, but because it taught me something I could not have learned any other way. A family that collapses when one person steps away was never built on love. It was built on dependency, and I had simply stopped being the foundation they leaned on. I did not break the family. They broke under the weight of their own choices. The sun dipped lower. A breeze moved across the grass. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. I felt full in a way I had never felt growing up. Full of myself, full of possibility, full of a future unshaped by someone else's emotions. That night, back at Carol's house, I wrote in my journal for the first time in months. I wrote about the bookstore, about Mia's kindness, about the way Henry always left a cup of tea on the counter for me, about the gentle rhythm of my days. And then I wrote a sentence I never expected to be true. I am not lost anymore. I closed the notebook and sat quietly for a long moment. Then I smiled. A small, private thing. For the first time, I knew exactly who I was without needing anyone else to confirm it. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.